Snow drifted sideways across the North Harbor waterfront, pushed by a wind sharp enough to cut through bone. Christmas lights blinked half-heartedly on the porches of old fishermen's houses, casting long reflections across the icy pavement. Jake Rourke walked with his hood low, hands buried in the pockets of his weathered jacket. Beside him, Shadow trotted with a steady rhythm, nose twitching, ears pricked, tail stiff, a silent sentinel always half a breath away from action. Jake preferred it this way: the cold, the quiet, the anonymity. After 15 years in the teams, silence felt more like home than celebration ever had. "Easy, boy," he murmured, as Shadow paused to scan an alleyway. "We're just checking the usual spots." Every Christmas Eve since he returned to North Harbor, Jake walked the same route. Behind the abandoned cannery, under the bridge where a cluster of the town's forgotten slept in cardboard shelters, past the docks where fishermen sometimes left extra food for drifters. He never told anyone why he did it. Maybe he didn't know himself. Maybe it was guilt. Or maybe it was the part of him that still believed rescue was possible, even outside the battlefield. Tonight felt colder than the years before. Shadow's breath fogged the air in quick bursts. Jake exhaled slowly, letting himself settle into the rhythm of footsteps crunching on frost. But then Shadow froze. Not paused. Froze. The dog's entire body went rigid, ears locking forward, nose slicing the air like a weapon locking onto scent. Jake knew that posture. He'd seen it in jungles, on desert roads, in villages lit only by burning debris. Shadow wasn't reacting to a stray cat or a raccoon. Something was wrong. "What is it?" he whispered, lowering to one knee. Shadow didn't bark. He almost never did. Instead, he nudged forward, nose pointing toward a narrow alleyway squeezed between an auto shop and an old bakery. The darkness inside looked thick enough to swallow sound. Jake clicked on his small tactical flashlight. What the beam revealed made him blink. A tiny figure was crouched beside the rusted dumpster, digging through a torn trash bag with shaking fingers. A girl, no older than 8, maybe 9. Her coat was thin, more like a worn hoodie than winter clothing. Snowflakes clung to her hair. She kept glancing over her shoulder, eyes darting like a cornered animal. Shadow took a step forward. Jake placed a hand on the dog's flank. "Wait." The girl heard the movement. She jerked upright so fast she almost slipped, grabbing the dumpster for balance. Her eyes widened. Fear first, then confusion, then something else Jake recognized instantly: desperation. No, don't take me back," she blurted. Her voice cracked, barely more than a whisper. "Please?" Jake raised his free hand slowly, palms up. "Hey, I'm not here to hurt you." Shadow sat down, tail tapping once, like a quiet reassurance. "What's your name?" Jake asked gently. The girl hesitated, pressing her back against the cold metal. "Emma." "That's a good name," Jake said. "I'm Jake. This is Shadow." Emma stared at the dog, more specifically into the dog's amber eyes. Something in her posture shifted, like she believed Shadow before she believed Jake. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he continued, scanning her face, the bruising near her jawline, partly hidden by her hair, the redness around her wrists, the way she winced when adjusting her stance. Signs he'd seen far too often, just never on someone this small. "I can't go home. He'll be angry." Jake felt the tightness in his chest, familiar and unwelcome, the kind that reminded him of a different child on a different continent, one he couldn't save. He swallowed. "All right, how about this? You don't have to go home, but you shouldn't stay out in the cold either. Come with me, just to get warm, just for tonight." Emma looked at Shadow again, as if waiting for the dog's verdict. Shadow stood, stepped forward, and gently nudged her hand with his nose. Emma's breath hitched. Then she nodded. Jake exhaled in relief. "Good. Let's get you somewhere safe."
As they walked toward the streetlight at the end of the alley, Jake couldn't shake one thought circling in his mind, like a warning he couldn't decipher. If a child ended up digging through trash on Christmas Eve, something worse was waiting behind her story, and Jake Rourke was about to walk straight into it.
Snowflakes fluttered beneath the streetlight as Jake led Emma and Shadow toward the truck parked a block away. Emma walked stiffly, arms wrapped around herself, flinching at every sudden sound. The rumble of a passing car, a distant shout from a bar, the metallic clang of a flagpole struck by wind. Shadow stayed glued to her side, adjusting his pace to match her tiny steps. Jake opened the passenger door. "Hop in, it's warm inside." Emma hesitated, scanning the street again, as if expecting someone to leap out of the shadows and grab her. Only when Shadow jumped lightly into the footwell and sat, tail thumping softly, did she climb in. Jake cranked the engine. The heater sputtered to life, blowing air that wasn't warm yet, but headed in that direction. Emma leaned toward the vents, holding her hands in front of them, like someone trying to believe warmth was real. "You hungry?" Jake asked. Emma nodded, without looking at him. He reached into the glove box, pulled out a protein bar and a small packet of crackers, the kind soldiers learn to appreciate after too many nights without real food. "It's not Christmas dinner, but it'll help." Emma tore the wrapper with trembling fingers and devoured the crackers in tiny, cautious bites, like she wasn't sure she was allowed to eat fast. Jake watched her in silence for a moment. He didn't want to scare her, but he also couldn't ignore the growing list of red flags. The bruises, the fear, the way she kept glancing at the window, as if someone might appear there and grab her. He tried again. "Emma, can you tell me what happened at home?" She froze mid-bite. Shadow let out a low, comforting chuff. Jake waited. Emma swallowed hard. "My dad, he gets really mad. Especially when he drinks. And he drinks every night." Jake's jaw tightened. He kept his voice steady. "Did he hurt you?" Emma turned her face toward the window. "I shouldn't say. He said if I ever told anyone, he'd..." Her words broke off like something inside her shut down. Jake didn't push. Not yet. Instead, he shifted gears and pulled onto Main Street. The little town was quiet, lights glowing through frosted windows, wreaths hanging from storefronts. It looked peaceful from the outside. Normal, safe. But Jake knew better. Evil didn't always hide in the dark. Sometimes it lived in the house next door.
A few minutes later, he stopped in front of the small medical clinic where he volunteered sometimes on holidays. Nurse Patel was on duty tonight, a calm, steady presence who never asked questions unless lives depended on it. "I'm just going to have my friend take a quick look," Jake told Emma. "Make sure you're okay." Emma gripped Shadow's fur so tightly the dog winced. "No hospitals, please." "It's not a hospital," Jake said gently. "Just a checkup. Shadow will stay with you." She still didn't move. So Shadow took the lead. He hopped out first, nudged Emma with his muzzle, then trotted toward the clinic door as if saying, "I trust this place. You can too." Emma followed. Inside, warm air and the smell of antiseptic wrapped around them. Nurse Patel looked up from her desk and raised an eyebrow at Jake, but didn't comment. Instead, she knelt down to Emma's eye level. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Emma whispered it. "Is this brave soldier your dog?" Shadow puffed out his chest proudly, earning the smallest, shyest smile from Emma. Nurse Patel examined the fading bruises and the sharper, newer marks near her wrists. She kept her voice steady, warm. "Nothing broken, but she's been under stress, and cold too long." Jake nodded. He already knew. "Jake," Patel said quietly, as Emma drank warm water on the exam table. "This isn't the first time I've seen signs like these in this town. If you don't report it, I will, but not tonight. She needs to feel safe first."
Patel held his gaze for a moment, then nodded. Back in the truck, Emma seemed calmer, but only until Jake passed the street leading toward the industrial district. She suddenly ducked down in her seat, hands over her head. "Emma," Jake slowed. "What is it?" Her voice trembled. "Don't go that way. He works there. If he sees my truck, if he sees me." Jake felt that cold, familiar tightening in his chest again. He made a silent turn away from the district. "Okay, we won't go near there." Emma peeked over the dashboard, still trembling. Shadow pressed his head gently against her shoulder until she steadied again. Jake exhaled slowly. Something about this was worse than he expected. Worse than just a drunk, abusive father. She wasn't just scared of going home. She was terrified he might come looking for her. Jake drove toward his cabin at the edge of town, every instinct shifting from concern to protection to the quiet, rising certainty of an approaching threat. Whatever truth lay behind Emma's fear, it was getting closer.
The road narrowed as Jake turned off the last paved street and onto the gravel path leading toward his cabin. Pines towered on both sides, their branches heavy with fresh snow. The world felt quieter out here, insulated from the chaos of town, exactly why Jake had chosen the place when he retired from the teams. Emma watched the trees pass by with wide eyes, not quite scared this time, more like unsure if places this quiet were real. When the truck rolled to a stop, Shadow hopped out first. Jake opened Emma's door and waited. She stepped down cautiously, glancing around as though trying to measure the danger level of each shadow. "It's safe," Jake said. "No one comes out here except me and him." He nodded toward Shadow, who proudly took up guard position near the porch. Emma stared at the cabin, small, sturdy, warm light spilling from the windows. It looks like a real house." Jake smiled faintly. "It is a real house." Inside, the heat from the wood stove washed over them instantly. A cast iron pot simmered quietly, filling the room with the smell of herbs and chicken. Emma blinked at it, her stomach growling loud enough for Shadow to tilt his head. "Sit anywhere you like," Jake said. "I'll grab towels. You need to warm up." Emma hovered near the door until Shadow nudged her toward the fireplace. Slowly, she sat on the rug, hands open to the flickering heat. Jake brought a thick blanket and wrapped it around her shoulders. Only then did she let out a long, shaky breath, as if warmth itself felt dangerous, like something that could disappear without warning. He ladled soup into a bowl and handed it to her. Emma stared at it. "For me?" He said, "For you." His voice was matter-of-fact, but something in her expression hit him harder than any enemy strike ever had. She ate quickly at first, then slower, as if no one was going to take the bowl away. Shadow lay beside her, tail sweeping the floor in slow, reassuring strokes. For a while, the cabin was silent, except for the crackle of firewood. When she finished, Emma pulled the blanket tighter and looked at Jake. "Are you a police officer?" "No." "A soldier?" "Not anymore." Emma studied him for a long moment. "But you saved people, right?"
Jake hesitated. "I tried to." She nodded, like that answer meant more than the full truth. "Shadow saved people too?" "Oh, he saved a lot more than that, including me." Shadow gave a soft snort, which made Emma almost smile. The brief warmth faded when her gaze drifted to the frost-covered window. Jake knew the moment the fear returned, the way her shoulders curled inward, the way her fingers clutched the blanket. "Emma," he said gently, "no one can get to you here." She lowered her voice to a whisper. "You don't know him." Jake leaned forward. "Then tell me. Help me understand." Her eyes glistened. "He gets scary when he drinks. He yells at me, breaks things. Sometimes he... She stopped, shaking. If he finds out I left, he won't just be mad. He'll hurt me more. Jake fought to keep his voice steady. I won't let that happen. No, she said abruptly, panic flaring. You don't get it. He said he'd hurt anyone who tried to help me. He said people like you don't scare him. Jake's jaw clenched. A chill, different from the winter cold, ran through him. People like you. Who exactly had her father dealt with? Before he could ask further, Shadow stood up sharply, ears high, nose forward. A low growl rumbled from his chest. Emma froze. What's wrong? Jake moved to the window beside the door, lifting the edge of the curtain just enough to look out. Headlights. Slow, crawling down the distant part of the gravel road. Not close enough to be certain, but close enough for Jake's instincts to lock into place. Emma's voice trembled. Is it him? Jake didn't answer right away. He watched the vehicle inch along the frozen path, moving like its driver was searching for someone or someone. Jake? Emma whispered. He dropped the curtain. Shadow barked once, sharp, decisive. Jake kneeled in front of Emma, eyes level with hers. Listen to me. No matter what happens, you stay behind Shadow. Do you understand? Emma nodded, fear swallowing whatever fragile calm she had built. Jake stood up, muscles tightening with a familiar anticipation he hadn't felt since the war. He wasn't certain who was coming down that road, but he knew one thing. Tonight, danger wasn't waiting behind Emma's story anymore. It was driving straight toward them. The cabin seemed to shrink into silence as the distant headlights crept farther down the gravel road. Snow, thin and restless, drifted across the window panes like quiet warnings. Jake stood still, listening. Shadow stayed pressed against the door, muscles coiled, tail low, ready to spring. Emma gripped the blanket against her chest. He found me, she whispered. Jake knelt just long enough to rest a steadying hand on her shoulder. We do not know that yet. The road is public. People pass through sometimes. Emma shook her head violently. Not tonight. Not this late. Jake had no answer for that. The hour was wrong. The night was wrong. Everything felt off kilter, the way it had felt in the seconds before an ambush overseas. He rose and crossed to the small storage bench beside the door, opening it quietly. Inside lay a locked metal case. He hesitated only a moment before unlocking the lid. Inside, wrapped in cloth, rested his old sidearm, a Sig Sauer P226, the same model he had carried during his service. He had hoped keeping it locked away would keep that part of his life at a distance. Tonight, distance was no longer a luxury. Shadow gave another low growl. The headlights were nearing the bend now, bright enough to cast long, shifting shapes against the trees. Jake closed the case with a soft click. Emma moved to the back hallway, stay low. No, she cried softly, eyes wide. If he sees me, he will be angry. He will... Emma. Jake rarely raised his voice, but this time the firmness was not anger. It was survival. You will do what I say. Shadow will stay in front of you. The dog barked, short and certain, as if promising her he belonged there. Emma finally scrambled toward the hallway, blanket trailing behind her like a shed piece of fear. Shadow followed, glancing back at Jake with a soldier's comprehension. Jake turned off the interior lights, plunging the cabin into muted darkness. Only the faint glow of the stove remained, flickering across the floorboards. He moved to the window at the far corner, crouching low. The truck, an old gray pickup, rolled to a stop near the edge of his clearing. No movement, no door opening, just idling, watching. Jake's breath slowed. Whoever they were studying cabin. That confirmed one thing. They were not lost. A moment passed, then another. Finally, the driver's side door opened. A tall man got out, unsteady on his feet. The posture was wrong, the gait sloppy. Jake's stomach tightened. The man stood near the headlights, face shadowed, but Jake could make out the bottle in his hand. Emma's father. Jake did not need a name, only the way the man swayed told him everything he needed to know. Drunk, angry, looking for a target that would not fight back. The man shouted into the night, "Emma, you little brat, you better get out here." Emma stiffened in the hallway. Shadow pressed his side against her legs, anchoring her. Jake stepped out onto the porch, keeping one hand resting near his holstered weapon, but not drawing it. Not yet. "That is far enough," he called. The man squinted through the lights. "Who the hell are you?" "Someone who is not letting you near that girl tonight." Recognition flickered across his expression, a slow, hostile comprehension. "You think you can keep her from me? She is my daughter." Jake's voice remained level, low but carrying. "She is a child, one who was alone in the cold. There are laws that protect her, and I will enforce them until the sheriff gets here." The man laughed, a broken, slurred sound. "Sheriff, you think I care about that? You think anyone scares me?" He stepped closer, weaving. "You think a random stranger and his mutt can stop me?" Shadow let out a deep warning bark that vibrated through the cabin walls. Jake stepped off the porch. "Do not take another step." The man did, and in that moment, something snapped. Not in Jake, but in the man himself. Rage overtook whatever rationality he had left. He lunged forward, raising the bottle as if it were a weapon. Shadow burst from the shadows like a bolt of black lightning. Jake reached for his weapon, but Shadow was faster. The dog intercepted the man's strike with a controlled, tactical hit, teeth bared but not sinking, knocking the man off balance and sending the bottle shattering into the snow. Emma screamed from inside the hallway, "Shadow!" Jake moved instantly, restraining the man on the ground before he could regain footing. The smell of alcohol burned in the air as the man thrashed, yelling threats that meant nothing anymore. Jake tightened his grip. "You are done. Do you hear me?" The man spat curses, muffled by snow and fury. But Jake no longer looked at him. He looked toward the cabin, toward the small silhouette in the doorway, trembling, watching the only protector she had ever known stand between her and the nightmare she had run from. And Jake knew this was only the beginning.
The snow crunched under Jake's boots as he held the man down, Shadow at his side, teeth bared but careful, alert to any sudden movement. The man writhed, groaning, spitting curses that trailed into the icy night air. Jake could feel the tension in every muscle of the man, fear mixed with anger, the unpredictable violence of a drunk father who had nothing left to lose. "Enough," Jake said firmly, pressing his weight against the man's shoulders. "You do not touch her. Not tonight. Not ever." The man spat at Jake's face. "You don't know me. You don't—" "I know enough," Jake interrupted, his voice low but unwavering. "I know what children deserve, and she is not yours to punish anymore." Shadow growled again, this time a warning note that vibrated through the man's bones. Emma watched from the doorway, shivering under the blanket, but no longer moving. She felt protected. She understood that whatever storm had followed her here, it had just met its match. Jake's mind worked fast. Calling the sheriff from here would take too long. The town was small, winter roads unpredictable. He needed to get Emma somewhere safe. But the question gnawed at him. Where could a child be safe when the threat was the one she called father? The man's protests turned into groans as Jake kept him pinned, sweat and snow running down the bridge of his nose. "You won't stop me!" Jake's voice didn't waver. "I already have, and I will keep doing it until the law gets here." Turning his attention to Emma, Jake said softly, "Stay behind Shadow. Keep low. Do not move unless I tell you."
Shadow sat obediently between them, a living barrier. Emma's small hands gripped the dog's fur, drawing courage from his steady presence. For the first time that night, she felt that maybe, just maybe, someone could actually save her. Minutes passed like hours. The man's energy drained as he struggled, his swaying less purposeful. Jake adjusted his grip, careful not to hurt him, but firm enough to maintain control.
Finally, distant sirens echoed over the frozen hills. The sound made the man's eyes widen. Jake felt a flicker of relief, but he remained vigilant. "Help is coming," he told Emma, keeping his voice calm but firm. When the sheriff's cruiser pulled up, lights flashing red and blue across the snow, Jake released his hold just enough for the deputies to cuff the man. Shadow moved back to Emma, tail sweeping across her lap in a reassuring rhythm. The man shouted threats over his shoulder, but his voice was fading, powerless against the combined force of law and protective willpower. Emma finally allowed herself to exhale. She stayed crouched behind Shadow, but her eyes were wide, absorbing every moment. Jake knelt beside her. "It's okay now, you're safe." Emma's lips trembled, but "He'll come back?" Jake shook his head. "Not tonight, not while I'm around, not while Shadow and I are here." He hesitated, letting the words sink in. Sometimes it takes more than a hero in uniform. It takes someone willing to step in when no one else will. That's what we're doing. The wind shifted, carrying snowflakes that sparkled like fragile promises. Emma looked at Shadow, then at Jake, then back at the fading headlights of the cruiser. Something inside her softened, trust, hope, something that had been missing for too long. Jake finally stood, brushing snow from his jacket. He looked at the cabin and the warm glow spilling through the windows. "Come inside," he said. "You'll be warm, fed, and dry. That's a start." As Emma followed, Shadow padding beside her, Jake allowed himself a moment to reflect. Saving a life wasn't always about battlefield heroics. Sometimes it was about being there for the small, quiet victories. Protecting a child from someone who should have been her guardian, standing firm when no one else could, and letting courage show itself in silence. Inside the cabin, Emma curled up by the fire, Shadow's head resting in her lap. Jake watched them, the weight of the night pressing against him. Not exhaustion, but something heavier, responsibility. Protecting this child meant more than vigilance. It meant making the right choices, over and over again, even when no one would applaud them. And for Jake Rourke, that was the real battlefield, one where victory was measured not in medals, but in hearts saved, lives changed, and the quiet knowledge that someone had finally been there to stand in the shadows and keep them safe. The snow fell harder outside, but inside the warmth and quiet carried a fragile promise. Tonight, at least, Emma had found safety, and Jake, for the first time in a long while, felt that perhaps even broken souls could find a moment of grace.
The fire crackled softly, the warmth casting flickering shadows across the cabin walls. Outside, the snow continued to fall, thick and heavy, nuding the world beyond the pines. Jake stood by the window, hands gripping the sill, eyes scanning the dark line of trees that marked the edge of his property. Even though the immediate threat had been neutralized, he could not shake the uneasy pulse of vigilance that had defined his life for years. Shadow sat at his feet, ears alert, eyes never leaving the tree line. Emma huddled on the rug near the fireplace, her small frame tucked into Shadow's warmth. She toyed nervously with the blanket, glancing at Jake but not speaking. The silence between them was fragile, held together by the crackling fire and the protective presence of the dog. Jake finally spoke, low and steady. "Emma, I need to know everything. Every detail you can tell me about him, your father, so we can make sure you are safe." She hesitated, eyes downcast. I can't remember it all. Sometimes I try, and it's like it disappears." Her voice trembled, and she pressed her face into Shadow's fur. "He gets really angry. Sometimes I hide for hours, and he doesn't even notice I'm gone. Other times, he yells so loud it makes my ears ring.
He throws things. Jake nodded slowly, absorbing every word. He knew these descriptions. They were the echoes of trauma, the same patterns he'd seen in faraway countries, in the lives of children caught in the shadows of violence. But Emma's world was smaller, more fragile, and more urgent. "It's not your fault," he said gently. "None of it. You survived this far because you're smart and careful. That doesn't make you weak." Emma's eyes flickered toward him. "But I feel small, helpless. I thought no one could protect me." Jake exhaled slowly. Sometimes it takes someone willing to step in, even if it's terrifying. That's what Shadow and I did tonight. We chose to be there, and we'll keep choosing, every day until you're safe. Shadow shifted slightly, pressing his nose to her hand, and she allowed herself a faint, almost imperceptible smile. For a moment, the cabin held a fragile peace. Then Jake's mind drifted to the war zones of his past, the missions he could not finish, the people he had failed to save. Emma reminded him painfully of those unfinished debts. He whispered to himself, "This is different. This time, I can fix it." He moved to the small desk where a worn notebook lay, pulled from his SEAL days, maps, notes, and codes, remnants of a life built on strategy, anticipation, and survival. He began sketching the layout of the cabin and the surrounding area, noting escape routes, lines of sight, and potential cover points. Even in peace, he planned.
Emma watched him, curiosity mixing with caution. "Are you still a soldier?" she asked softly. Jake's lips tightened. "I am what I was trained to be, but now I fight differently." Shadow let out a low, contented growl, signaling to Jake that Emma was secure, for now. Hours passed. The storm outside grew harsher, wind whipping through the pines like unseen hands testing the cabin walls. Jake moved from window to window, checking the perimeter repeatedly. Every crack of snow against the roof, every distant howl of a fox or owl made him tense. Emma finally settled against the fire, her head resting on Shadow's side. Jake watched her, thinking about the fragility of trust, the resilience required to survive trauma, and the invisible scars that would follow her beyond this night. He understood something vital. Tonight was only the beginning. The legal system, protective services, and social workers could help, but the real work would be in rebuilding her sense of safety, her belief that someone could stand between her and the darkness. Jake pulled a chair near the fire and sat, rubbing his face. Shadow leaned against his leg, alert but relaxed. Outside, the wind screamed, but inside, the cabin held a quiet warmth. And in that warmth, Jake felt the quiet, heavy weight of responsibility. This wasn't a battlefield of guns and explosions anymore. It was a battlefield of vigilance, patience, and quiet courage. And for the first time in years, Jake Rourke welcomed the fight. He looked at Emma and Shadow, the living proof that even in a world hardened by cruelty, there were moments of redemption, small victories worth guarding with everything he had. The snow fell relentlessly, but inside the cabin, a quiet determination settled over the three of them. They would survive this winter, together, no matter the storms ahead.
The first rays of morning broke over North Harbor, pale sunlight reflecting off the thick blanket of snow covering the pines and the frozen shoreline. Inside the cabin, the fire had dwindled to embers, casting faint, trembling shadows across the wooden floor. Jake stirred, lifting his gaze toward Emma, who was curled up beside Shadow, her breath slow and steady for the first time since he had found her. He exhaled quietly, letting the weight of the night settle into his shoulders. The adrenaline had faded, leaving only the gnawing vigilance that never fully left him. Shadow stirred, stretching his limbs, and nudged Emma awake with a soft nose. She blinked sleepily, shivering,
then allowed herself a faint smile when she realized she was still safe, still warm. "Good morning," Jake said softly, keeping his voice gentle. "How's the warm side of the blanket?" Emma managed a small nod, still holding on to Shadow's fur. I think I can eat breakfast," she whispered, voice hoarse from the night. Jake moved to the small kitchen area and poured water into a kettle, the soft hiss of it heating filling the cabin. He retrieved bread, peanut butter, and fruit from the small pantry, preparing a simple meal. I knew it wasn't fancy, but it was enough to ground someone who had been starved, not just for food, but for care. As Emma ate slowly, Shadow lying alert at her side, Jake watched her carefully. Every gesture, every hesitation told him more about the nights she had endured. The bruises and fear weren't just physical, they were carried in her posture, her wary eyes, and her sudden flinches. And he knew that the warmth of the cabin, the presence of Shadow, and even his own vigilance could not erase all of that overnight. When she finished, Jake knelt to her level. "Emma, we need to talk about today. You need to feel safe, and part of that is knowing what's next." Her small eyes lifted, the uncertainty clear. "Are we going back to the police? Will he come?" Jake shook his head firmly. "Not yet. First, we make sure you're calm, you have food, and we let the sheriff take the man into custody. He won't be coming after you today." Emma's lips quivered. "What if he finds me again?" Jake's gaze softened but stayed firm. "Then Shadow and I will be here. You're not alone anymore." A distant rumble made all three of them freeze, Shadow with ears pricked, Emma clutching the blanket, and Jake scanning the tree line. But it was only the wind rattling the roof and snow sliding from the eaves. Still, Jake knew that caution was never a weakness. "Breakfast is done," he said finally, helping Emma to stand. "We're going to bundle up and take a walk outside. Cold air will help clear our heads, and Shadow needs his exercise too."
Outside, the snow glistened like glass under the morning light. Shadow bounded ahead, tail wagging, while Emma hesitated at the door. Jake held his hand out. "Come on, you'll be safe." She stepped forward slowly, boots crunching in the snow, and Shadow immediately turned back to nuzzle her, offering silent reassurance. Jake watched as she began to relax slightly, her small figure adjusting to the brightness, to the quiet beauty of the frozen world beyond the cabin. Walking down the small trail through the pines, Jake reflected on the events of the previous night. The chaos, the fear, the adrenaline, it was all behind them for now. But he knew this was only the beginning of a longer battle, rebuilding trust, nurturing a child's sense of safety, and confronting the scars left by someone who should have protected her. As they returned to the cabin, Emma's cheeks flushed from the cold, her eyes brighter. She glanced at Jake. "Thank you for staying." Jake smiled faintly. "It's my job now, and Shadow's too." The small family of three entered the cabin again, the warmth of fire and safety enveloping them. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving only silence and snow. Inside, a quiet determination settled over them. Jake knew the days ahead would demand vigilance, courage, and patience. But for the first time, he felt that even the smallest victories could be enough to build something lasting: trust, protection, and hope. And in the quiet morning, watching Emma and Shadow, Jake allowed himself a rare fleeting thought that perhaps tonight, just perhaps, they had all survived, not just the storm outside, but the shadows that followed them from the past.
The cabin had settled into a deceptive calm. The storm had passed, leaving a pristine blanket of snow that sparkled in the mid-morning light. But Jake knew better than to trust appearances. Outside, the world looked serene, but the echoes of last night's fear still lingered, heavy in the cabin air. Shadow lay by the fire, alert but relaxed, eyes flicking occasionally to the door, as if guarding against a threat invisible to anyone else. Emma sat near the stove, quietly, tracing patterns in the frost on the window with her fingers. Her eyes were distant, haunted by memories she could barely articulate. Jake watched her for a long moment, noting the subtle tensing of her shoulders whenever he moved or spoke. She was safe physically, but the psychological scars ran deeper than the snow outside could cover. Jake knelt beside her. "Emma, it's okay to talk about it, to tell me what scares you. We'll take it one step at a time." She shook her head, biting her lip. "I don't know if I can. Sometimes I forget, but then it comes back, and I feel like I'm back in the dark alley, or he's yelling and I can't." "You don't have to relive it all at once," Jake said softly. "Just the parts you feel ready to share. Shadow and I will stay right here with you. No one will hurt you here." Emma's eyes shifted toward Shadow, who pressed his head into her lap. A faint smile flickered across her face. He was always mad, always yelling. And sometimes I thought I was the reason, that if I moved the wrong way, it would get worse. Jake swallowed the familiar pang of anger and sadness. It was a memory he knew too well, the helplessness in the face of another's uncontrolled violence. But this time he had the power to intervene. He could be the shield she had never had. He reached for her small hands. "It wasn't your fault, none of it. You survived because you were strong. And now we make sure no one can ever put you in that position again." Emma hesitated, then whispered, "But what if he comes back?" Jake's gaze hardened. "Then we'll be ready. We won't wait for him to find you. We'll act first." She looked at him, eyes wide and uncertain, and then at Shadow. The dog nudged her hand, steady and comforting. She took a slow, measured breath, letting the warmth of the cabin and Shadow's presence anchor her. The door creaked, and Jake immediately shifted, muscles tensing. But it was only a gust of wind pushing snow against the frame. Still, the instinct remained. A soldier's vigilance never truly sleeps. "Emma," Jake said gently, guiding her toward a small table by the window, "we need a plan. You can't stay hidden forever, and we need to make sure the sheriff has the information he needs. Shadow and I will keep you safe while we do it." Emma nodded slowly, the seriousness of the moment settling on her young shoulders. I'll try." Jake smiled faintly, knowing that trying was as much progress as anyone could hope for at this stage. He spent the next hour drawing a rough map on paper. Escape routes, safe zones, lines of sight from the cabin, and locations where Emma could hide if necessary. Every detail mattered. Shadow circled the cabin periodically, sniffing the air, ears twitching at every sound. Emma watched him, fascination mingling with fear. "Do you always do this?" she asked softly. Jake chuckled lightly, the sound almost foreign to the quiet cabin. "When it's life or death, yes. Preparation is everything." She nodded slowly, absorbing the lesson. For Emma, these small details were more than strategy. They were proof that someone cared enough to plan, to protect, to act before danger arrived. Outside, the world gleamed under the winter sun, a deceptive calm hiding the dangers that might still come. Inside, a fragile rhythm of trust was forming. Jake and Emma, together with Shadow, began building something stronger than fear: vigilance, safety, and the first delicate strands of hope. But even as sunlight warmed the wooden floorboards, Jake knew the shadows of last night had not fully retreated. The man who had threatened Emma was in custody for now, but threats were rarely contained by walls or law alone. Vigilance would remain their constant companion. And in that quiet cabin, with snow sparkling outside and Shadow's low rumble filling the silence, Jake understood. Survival was not just about facing danger, it was about preparing for it, teaching the young to navigate it, and standing guard over those who could not yet stand for themselves. Tonight, the shadows might be gone. Tomorrow, they could return. But together, they would be ready.
The cabin had settled into a rhythm of quiet vigilance. Snow blanketed the pines outside, muting all sounds except the occasional creak of frost settling on branches. Jake had spent the morning reviewing maps, marking escape routes, and preparing supplies for any unforeseen events. Shadow lay near the door, ears twitching at each distant sound, eyes following even the smallest movement outside. Emma sat nearby, coloring in a small notebook, but her fingers trembled slightly with the residue of last night's fear. Jake was about to take a sip of his coffee when a sudden, faint knock echoed through the cabin, sharp and deliberate. His body tensed instantly. "Who's there?" he called, voice calm but alert. There was a pause, then a hesitant reply. "Please, I mean no harm. My name is Marta." Jake's eyes narrowed. Marta, a name familiar enough to pique his attention, but not enough to trust immediately. He grabbed his jacket and holstered sidearm, signaling Shadow to stand. The dog's growl was low, controlled, warning any intruder that the cabin was guarded. Jake opened the door slightly, peering out. A woman stood in the snow, hood drawn over her head, scarf covering most of her face. She raised her hands slightly, careful to show she carried no weapons. "I'm not a threat," she said again, her voice trembling from the cold, or perhaps fear. "I heard about the girl, Emma. I can help." Jake's instincts told him to slam the door, to protect the child and Shadow from any potential risk. But something in the woman's eyes, a raw, urgent sincerity, made him hesitate. "Step inside," he said cautiously, opening the door wider. Marta moved quickly but carefully, brushing snow from her boots as Jake stepped aside. Shadow's posture remained tense, ears forward, tracking every movement. Emma watched from the corner, clinging to Shadow, wide-eyed and silent. Marta pulled back her hood, revealing short, dark hair streaked with gray. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and haunted, as if she had seen more than most people could bear. She carried a small bag, carefully slung over her shoulder. "I work with children who've been in danger," Marta explained, her voice low, almost a whisper. I was informed about your situation. I can help you ensure she is safe, legally and physically. I can provide temporary shelter if necessary." Jake studied her carefully. His life had taught him to distrust quick appearances of help, especially in situations involving vulnerable children. He took a measured step back, keeping one hand near his weapon and the other on Shadow's harness.
"Why now?" Jake asked. "Why risk coming here in the middle of a storm?" Marta's eyes glistened with unspoken emotion. "Because children shouldn't be left alone in the cold. Because some people in your town don't act fast enough. And because I knew, the moment I saw her file, that she needed someone willing to stand in the way." Emma peered out from behind Shadow, her small hands clutching his fur. "You can help me?" she asked softly. Jake glanced down at her. She wanted assurance, someone to fight for her, someone to promise safety. He looked back at Marta, measuring her words against the urgency in her eyes. Finally, he nodded. "We'll hear what you have to say, but any misstep, any attempt to endanger her, Shadow and I will not hesitate." Marta nodded solemnly. "I understand." As she laid her bag down, Jake noticed she had documents, forms, and what appeared to be a small first aid kit. Her presence was professional, deliberate, and efficient, a sharp contrast to the chaos of the previous night. "Let's sit," Jake said, motioning toward the table. Emma moved closer to Shadow, but curiosity edged out fear. Marta opened the bag and pulled out paperwork detailing temporary protective custody, legal measures, and safety plans. "If we act quickly," she said, "we can make sure he never finds her again, but I need your cooperation and your vigilance. I won't sugarcoat it. The process is complicated and he's unpredictable." Jake leaned back, studying her. Shadow patted around Emma, keeping her close, ears alert. Outside, the snow continued to fall, a serene facade hiding the dangers that might still approach. Jake finally spoke, voice calm but resolute. "Then we do it. Together. But we do it my way." Marta's gaze met his, unwavering. "Agreed." Emma's small face peeked around Shadow's side, tentative but hopeful. The presence of an ally, someone experienced and determined, brought a spark of trust. For the first time since last night, she allowed herself to believe they might actually win this battle, Not with violence, but with strategy, vigilance, and courage. Outside, the snow glimmered, masking the dangers that remained hidden. Inside, a fragile alliance formed, one that could determine whether Emma would finally have a chance to live without fear. And Jake knew that from this moment, the real fight for her safety was just beginning.
Jake leaned over the small table, scrutinizing the maps spread before him. Marta had laid out emergency shelters, safe houses, and patrol schedules for local authorities. Each location was marked with notes on accessibility, security, and response time. Shadow rested at his feet, ears twitching, eyes never leaving the window. Emma sat across from them, clutching her blanket tightly, occasionally tracing a finger over the lines of the map without really understanding them. "Here's what we can do," Marta said, pointing to a secluded cabin a few miles north. "It's under 24-hour surveillance. If he attempts to approach, authorities will intercept immediately. She can stay there until the legal process is complete." Jake nodded slowly. "It's good, but we need contingencies. Roads can freeze, patrols get delayed, and he's unpredictable. Emma needs multiple options. Shadow and I will scout the route before we move her." Emma peeked at the map, curiosity fighting with fear. "Do I have to go?" Jake's gaze softened. "Yes, for your safety. But Shadow and I will be with you every step of the way. You won't be alone. Not now, not ever." Shadow shifted slightly, nudging Emma's knee with his nose, a silent promise of protection. Her small hand covered his, and for a brief moment the tension eased. Marta spread out more documents highlighting legal measures that could be implemented immediately. Temporary restraining orders, police notifications, child protective services, everything will be coordinated. But timing is critical. We move today. Jake absorbed the information, his mind calculating every risk, every variable. He was used to high-stakes planning from his days in the Navy SEALs, but this was different. This was not about eliminating a target. It was about protecting innocence, preventing trauma, and preserving a fragile trust that had only just begun to form. "Emma," he said gently, crouching beside her, "I need you to remember a few things. Trust Shadow, trust Marta, and trust me. We are here to keep you safe, always. Do you understand?" She nodded slowly, blinking back tears. I think so." Jake smiled faintly. "Good. That's all I need for now." He rose and moved toward the window, scanning the snow-covered horizon. The winter sun was higher now, reflecting off the ice-crested trees. Despite the calm, Jake remained alert. He knew that danger could return at any moment, and the smallest miscalculation could undo everything.
Martha observed him silently. "You are very thorough," she remarked. Jake didn't look back. "I learned that the hard way. One mistake, one hesitation, and someone gets hurt. I don't intend to make that mistake again." The next hour passed in a focused blur. Supplies were packed: extra clothing, food, emergency medical kits, communication devices. Shadow watched every movement, ready to respond instantly. Emma helped where she could, carrying a small pack of her belongings, her small hands trembling with the weight of responsibility she had been thrust into. Finally, Jake turned to Martha. "We leave in 30 minutes. I want the route scouted, the cabin secure, and Emma ready to move. No surprises." Martha nodded, her expression tight but confident. "Agreed. I'll coordinate with local authorities and ensure the protective measures are in place." Emma hugged Shadow tightly, whispering, "I'm scared." Jake knelt, resting a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Being scared is okay. It means you're aware. It means you're ready. And I promise, we will get through this, together." Shadow nudged her again, firm and steady, as if reinforcing Jake's words with the silent loyalty only a canine could offer. Outside, the snow sparkled deceptively serene, a false calm hiding the challenges ahead. But inside the cabin, 3 lives, bound by trust, courage, and necessity, prepared for the journey that could change everything. Jake exhaled, feeling the weight of responsibility settle across his shoulders. Every step, every choice, every promise mattered now more than ever. The fight was no longer about survival in battlefields far away.
It was about keeping a child alive, protected, and believing that the world could be safe again. And as the wind rattled the eaves of the cabin, Jake knew that their first test of the day was about to begin. The wind had picked up again, gusting through the sparse pines lining the road. Snow whipped against their faces, forcing them to squint and hunch forward. Shadow moved close to Emma, pressing his body against hers, a steady, warm presence against the biting cold. Every crunch of snow underfoot reminded Jake that danger could lurk anywhere, hidden in the shadows, masked by the blinding whiteness of the landscape. "Almost there," Jake murmured, scanning the horizon. Marta walked beside him, clipboard in hand, issuing quiet instructions to the authorities manning the next checkpoint. "They're expecting us, but we can't let our guard down. Even the briefest lapse could give him an opening." Emma clutched Shadow's fur tightly, legs trembling. I don't want to go there," she whispered, voice small. "What if he finds me?" Jake crouched beside her, resting a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Emma, listen to me. He won't find you. Not today, not ever. Shadow and I are here. Marta is here. We've planned every step. You just have to trust us." Emma's eyes searched his face, looking for the certainty she had never felt before. Slowly, she nodded, drawing courage from Shadow's calm presence. As they reached the checkpoint cabin, two uniformed officers waved them over. Jake exchanged a brief, terse nod with them. "Status?" he asked. "All clear. Roads ahead monitored and patrols are active along your route," one officer replied. "ETA to safe house? 45 minutes under current conditions." Jake exhaled slowly. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was as close to one as they could get. Shadow growled softly, picking up a faint, unusual scent on the wind. Jake's gaze followed the dog's nose to the tree line. Nothing moved visibly, but instinct screamed caution. "Stay close," he whispered to Emma. "No wandering, no hesitation." Marta adjusted her hood and checked her radio. "We'll proceed as planned. Authorities will monitor remotely, but we move fast." The first stretch of road was narrow and winding, lined with dense pines. Snowdrifts formed pockets where a person, or a shadow of one, could hide. Jake took point, eyes sweeping constantly, Shadow just ahead sniffing the air. Marta followed, ensuring Emma remained protected and calm. The girl's small hand gripped the dog's fur, knuckles white with tension. Midway along the route, Emma flinched as the wind carried a distant, echoing bark. Shadow's ears perked, hair along his spine bristling. Jake froze, signaling for Marta and Emma to do the same. "Just a fox," Marta whispered. "Or maybe a stray dog." Jake's eyes didn't leave the tree line. His training in high-stakes operations had taught him to expect the unexpected. Shadow growled low, signaling vigilance, and Emma pressed closer to the dog, seeking comfort. Minutes later, the safe house came into view. A small, sturdy cabin surrounded by a wire fence and monitored with cameras. The sight brought a rare, cautious relief. Emma's shoulders relaxed slightly, though the tension in her eyes remained. Jake approached the gate, exchanging a code with the surveillance team. The gate clicked open, and Marta led Emma inside first. Shadow followed, moving as if he were guarding the very air around her. Jake stayed last, scanning the perimeter before stepping inside. Inside, warmth from the cabin contrasted sharply with the frigid world outside. Lights were low but functional, and the space was prepared for an extended stay. Emma's eyes widened at the sight of beds, blankets, and food. "You're safe now," Jake said firmly. "No one can reach you here. Not him, not anyone." Emma let out a shaky laugh, relief and disbelief mingling in her expression. Shadow nudged her again, as if confirming Jake's words, and she finally allowed herself to relax. Jake stepped to the window, looking back at the snowy road they had crossed. Every step, every decision, every ounce of vigilance had led to this moment. "Today was just the beginning," Marta said quietly, closing her notebook. "The legal process will take time, but she's secure. And with your protection," she glanced at Jake, "she'll get through it." Jake nodded. Shadow's tail wagged slightly, sensing his handler's calm. Emma hugged the dog tightly, whispering a quiet "thank you." Outside, the snow continued to fall, masking the roads and hiding the dangers still possible. Inside, 3 lives, bound by trust, courage, and determination, had crossed a threshold. The battle to protect Emma was far from over, but for the first time, hope had a foothold. And as Jake surveyed the cabin, he understood that the journey ahead was no longer just about survival. It was about teaching trust, fostering courage, and ensuring that this child, finally, could have a life free of fear.
The cabin smelled of pine and dry firewood, but Jake could still feel the chill from the snow outside seeping into the corners of his mind. Shadow lay near Emma, ears twitching as he listened to every creak and groan of the old building. Emma sat cross-legged on one of the beds, hugging her knees, eyes distant and silent. Marta moved quietly, organizing supplies and checking communications devices, but her brow remained tight with concern. Jake leaned against the doorframe, watching Emma. The girl's body was small, fragile, but she carried the tension of nights spent in fear. Every slight noise, every shadow seemed to send her thoughts racing back to the alleyways, the yelling, the darkness she had endured. "You're safe here," Jake said softly, crouching to her level. "No one is coming to hurt you. Not tonight, not tomorrow." Emma's eyes flicked to him, filled with a mixture of skepticism and longing. I don't know if I can ever feel safe," she whispered. Jake exhaled slowly. Feeling safe takes time. It's not something that happens overnight. But trust can grow and courage can grow one step at a time. And Shadow and I are here for every step. The dog nudged her hand, letting her know Jake's words were true. Emma offered a tentative smile, the first of the day that didn't tremble. Marta joined them, kneeling beside Jake. "We need to talk about the past," she said quietly. "Not just for legal purposes, but so Emma can start processing. If we ignore it, it stays inside, festering." Jake nodded, thinking back to his own memories. Missions that went wrong, the lives he couldn't save, the lingering guilt. Sometimes you can't change what's been done, but you can decide what to do now. And protecting her, that's what matters. Emma flinched slightly, her eyes filling with tears. He's still out there. I dream he comes back." Jake placed a firm hand on her shoulder. "Then we make sure he never can. You survived before, and you will survive again. This time, you're not alone, and anyone who threatens you will face consequences."
Shadow growled softly at the window, ears erect. Jake looked up and noticed the shadows of trees moving with the wind, long fingers of darkness stretching across the cabin walls. It was a stark reminder. Even in safety, the world was not free of threats. Marta pulled out a notebook, opening it to sketches of security measures, legal steps, and potential risks. "We have to prepare for the emotional battle too," she said. "Emma needs to feel control over her environment. That means routines, expectations, and letting her participate in decisions where possible." Jake agreed silently. The child had endured too much chaos. She needed agency, a sense that she could influence her safety, even in small ways. The afternoon passed in a careful rhythm. Meals were shared quietly, Shadow escorted Emma on short walks around the perimeter, and Jake and Marta discussed contingencies. The silence was punctuated by laughter only rarely, but each small smile was a victory. Later, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, Jake stepped outside to inspect the exterior. The snow crunched under his boots, and the cold wind bit at his face. Shadow trailed him, alert and vigilant, scanning the tree line as if it held secrets yet to be discovered. Jake thought about the journey ahead,
legal proceedings, potential threats, the slow process of building trust. Each step carried weight. But for the first time in a long while, he felt a flicker of hope. Emma's presence had awakened something he had buried deep during years of service. The belief that one act of courage, one choice to protect someone, could ripple far beyond the immediate moment. Returning inside, he found Emma resting on the bed, Shadow curled beside her, breathing steady. Marta was filling out forms, but she paused to glance at the pair, offering a faint smile of reassurance. Jake knelt, whispering to Emma, "Tonight we rest. Tomorrow we face whatever comes together. And remember, you're stronger than you think." Emma nodded, her hand brushing Shadow's fur. The dog's steady warmth radiated a silent promise that no darkness could touch her while they were near. Outside, the snow settled quietly on the forest, shadows stretching long and still. But inside the cabin, trust was growing, courage was strengthening, and a small girl was learning for the first time that she could survive the past and face the future without fear. The long night stretched ahead, but for now they had a fragile, precious peace. And Jake knew that peace, though delicate, was worth defending with every ounce of vigilance he had.
Night had fallen, thick and unyielding, wrapping the cabin in a quiet tension. The snowstorm had returned, winds howling through the trees and rattling the roof. Inside, the warmth of the cabin contrasted sharply with the chill outside, but Jake's mind was as restless as the storm. Shadow lay at his feet, ears twitching, sensing the unease in his handler. Emma sat huddled beneath a blanket, watching the flames flicker in the fireplace, eyes wide and wary. Marta moved quietly, checking radios and documents, her voice low and steady. Jake's gaze met hers. "He won't stay contained forever," he said, voice firm. "We have to be ready. Emma needs to see that we act decisively, not just react." Marta nodded. "I've coordinated with the authorities. Temporary restraining orders are in place, patrols are monitoring. But sometimes legal measures aren't enough. You know that better than anyone." Jake exhaled, memories of past missions surfacing unbidden. Late-night extractions, hostile territories, lives dependent on split-second decisions. He glanced at Emma, small and fragile, and then at Shadow, steadfast and alert. "Tonight," he said quietly, "we prepare for the possibility that he might come himself. We can't wait for the law to react. We have to be proactive." Emma flinched. Will he hurt you?" Jake crouched to her level, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "Shadow and I will protect you. No one will get close without us knowing, but you have to trust us completely. Can you do that?" She nodded, eyes wide but beginning to reflect a fragile courage. I trust you." Shadow pressed his head into her lap, reinforcing the promise with silent loyalty. Marta unrolled a tactical diagram on the table, marking positions, escape routes, and safe zones within and around the cabin. Jake will take point outside if necessary. I'll manage communications and coordinate with the authorities. Emma stays inside with Shadow until it's safe. If anything happens, Shadow alerts us immediately. Jake studied the map, considering every angle, every possible approach the father could take. He was unpredictable, fueled by anger and addiction, but Shadow's keen senses would detect his presence long before he reached the cabin. Timing is critical. We cannot underestimate him. Any misstep and he could put Emma at risk. We control the perimeter, we control the outcome.
The wind rattled the windows again, carrying the scent of pine, snow, and an underlying tension. Shadow growled low, alerting Jake to a subtle shift in the outside air. Jake's hand rested lightly on the dog's harness. "Good, you feel it too," he murmured. Emma's small fingers clutched Shadow's fur. "I'm scared," she admitted softly. Jake nodded, acknowledging her fear. "It's okay to be scared. It means you're aware, and it means you're ready. Fear makes us vigilant. And right now, vigilance will keep you safe." Outside, the storm intensified. Shadows of trees stretched long and warped across the snow, dancing like phantoms in the firelight. Jake felt the familiar tension in his muscles, the heightened awareness that came from years in hostile environments. This was different, though. This was personal. No mission briefing, no chain of command. This was about protecting a child from a man who had failed in every role he was supposed to fulfill. Marta finalized the communications check, then looked at Jake. "We are as ready as we can be. All we can do now is act if necessary. You, me, Shadow, Emma. We're a unit. Stick to the plan." Jake exhaled, letting the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. Tonight, we confront the storm. Not just the one outside, but the one he carries with him. Shadow growled again, low and steady, as if echoing Jake's determination. Emma's hand tightened on the dog's fur, drawing strength from his presence. The night pressed on, wind lashing the cabin, snow swirling in blinding sheets. Inside, they were quiet, tense, and alert. But amidst the fear and anticipation, a fragile bond held them together. A soldier, a canine, a child, and an ally, all united by the promise that no darkness could reach Emma while they stood guard. And somewhere beyond the storm, a man who thought he could intimidate and control was about to learn that courage, vigilance, and loyalty could not be broken.
The night had deepened into an oppressive darkness. Snow swirled in harsh gusts, obscuring the faint outlines of the trees surrounding the cabin. Jake stood at the window, Shadow's body pressed against his leg, ears alert, growling softly at the unseen threats beyond. Marta checked the communications devices one last time, making sure authorities were monitoring every angle. Emma clutched Shadow's fur, her small frame trembling, but holding fast to the steady warmth beneath her hands. A sudden noise, footsteps crunching in the snow, made Shadow stiffen. Jake's hand moved instinctively toward his sidearm, eyes narrowing. "He's here," Jake murmured. Every instinct in his body screamed for immediate action, but he held himself still, calculating the best approach. Emma's small voice whispered, Is it him?" Jake crouched to her level. "Stay behind Shadow. Don't move. Don't speak unless I tell you to. Understand?" She nodded, gripping the dog tighter. Shadow growled low, a steady, unwavering warning that seemed to echo the tension in the air. The door rattled, and a voice, hoarse, angry, and erratic, called out, "Emma, open up! You can't hide forever." Jake's jaw tightened. "Shadow, stay close," he murmured. The dog's fur bristled, body coiled like a spring, ready to protect. Marta whispered, "I've notified authorities. They're close, but it may take minutes for them to arrive. You control the encounter." Jake nodded, his mind moving quickly. Every past mission, every split-second decision, all the years in hostile environments had led to this moment. He opened the door slowly, Shadow stepping in front of him, the canine barrier clear and imposing. The man, Emma's father, stood in the storm, frozen by both the cold and the sudden, intimidating presence of Jake and Shadow. His face was red, eyes wild, hands trembling. "Emma, come back with me," he shouted, voice cracking with rage and desperation. Jake's tone was calm, but firm. "She's not going anywhere with you. Not now, not ever. Step back, or Shadow and I will stop you." The man hesitated, swayed by the authority in Jake's voice and the low, warning growl emanating from Shadow. Marta moved closer to the cabin, voice steady. "Jake, authorities are 2 minutes out. Do not engage unless absolutely necessary." The man's breathing grew erratic. "You don't understand. She's mine. Shadow lunged slightly, barking, a clear protective strike meant to intimidate. Emma flinched but did not retreat. She watched, wide-eyed, as her protector, the soldier and his canine, stood unwavering between her and the danger. Jake held his ground. "Emma is under protection. You are not taking her. Not now, not ever. Step away from the door." The man's shoulders sagged, confusion and fear breaking through the rage. He took a step back, stumbling in the snow, as if realizing for the first time that force alone could not reclaim what he had lost control over. Emma, sensing the shift, whispered, "Jake, he's scared." Jake didn't respond immediately. He stayed vigilant, hands still near Shadow's harness, eyes never leaving the man's movements. The wind howled, masking sounds,
but the authority of the cabin, Shadow's presence, and the arrival of law enforcement closed the circle around the man. Minutes later, headlights appeared through the blizzard. Officers emerged, quickly moving to secure the man. He struggled briefly, then went limp under the firm control of trained hands. Emma exhaled, clutching Shadow tightly, relief flooding her small frame. Marta exhaled, her shoulders relaxing for the first time. "You did it," she said softly, glancing at Jake. "You protected her, not with weapons alone, but with presence, vigilance, and courage." Emma hugged Shadow tightly, whispering a shaky, grateful thank you. Jake knelt beside her, voice calm, steady. "You're safe now. The danger is over. We stood our ground, and nothing could reach you here." Outside, the snowstorm continued, fierce but indifferent. Inside, however, trust had crystallized. The shadow of fear had been confronted, and for the first time, Emma could imagine a future beyond it. Shadow's steady warmth, Jake's unwavering presence, and Marta's quiet guidance had formed an unbreakable shield. And in that shield, Emma found not just protection, but hope. A first, fragile glimpse at the possibility of safety, courage, and healing.
The storm outside had begun to wane, leaving a quiet stillness over the snow-blanketed landscape. Inside the cabin, the tension that had gripped every corner for days began to dissolve, replaced by a cautious sense of relief. Emma sat cross-legged on the floor, Shadow curled beside her like a protective sentinel. Jake leaned against the wall, weary but vigilant, eyes scanning the horizon one last time before allowing himself a brief exhale. Marta moved quietly, organizing papers, radios, and legal documents, though her shoulders were visibly less rigid. Emma spoke softly, almost to herself. "I can't believe it's over. He's gone." Jake crouched beside her, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "It's over because we acted, Emma. We faced the danger together. You trusted me and Shadow, and that trust saved you." Shadow nudged her hand, his warm eyes meeting hers, reinforcing Jake's words with the unwavering loyalty only a canine could provide. Emma hugged him tightly, burying her face in his fur, letting the relief she had held back finally flow. Marta joined them, kneeling with a gentle smile. Today wasn't just about protecting her from him, it was about giving her a foundation, a sense that the world can be safe, that there are people who care, and that courage doesn't have to come from fighting alone. Sometimes it comes from being brave enough to trust. Jake nodded, watching the girl breathe more steadily, her body beginning to relax. He had spent years in the military, witnessing courage in the form of discipline, action, and sacrifice. But this, protecting a child, giving her a chance to heal, and standing guard over her life with patience and presence, felt like a different kind of honor, a quieter, deeper form of heroism. Emma looked up at him, eyes shining with tentative trust. Will he ever come back? Jake shook his head firmly. No. The authorities have him now, and even if he tried, Shadow and I, along with Marta and the people watching, would make sure you're never in danger again. You're safe, Emma. That's final. The girl exhaled, a long, shaky breath that seemed to carry away days of fear, loneliness, and uncertainty. She leaned back against Shadow, who rested his head on her lap, and for the first time allowed herself to smile without restraint. Marta stood, glancing at both of them. Tomorrow, we start rebuilding routines. Emma will attend school, meet therapists, and continue learning that she has control over her life. Today was about safety. Tomorrow is about healing. Jake rose, stretching his stiff muscles, then turned to look out the window. The snow sparkled under the pale light of the rising moon, reflecting a calm and fragile beauty. Healing, he said quietly, almost to himself, takes time, but every step forward, no matter how small, is worth the fight. Shadow rose, nudging Jake's hand with his nose, a gentle reminder that vigilance never truly ended. Jake knelt to scratch behind the dog's ears. Good job, partner. You did what you were born to do. Emma watched, her small hand still gripping Shadow's fur, and whispered, "Thank you, both of you." Jake smiled faintly, feeling a weight lift from his chest. "You're welcome. But it's you who was brave, Emma. You trusted,
You stayed close, and you let yourself be protected. That courage, that's what made today possible. Marta moved to pack away the remaining equipment, her voice soft but firm. Remember this moment, Emma. The fear you felt was real, but so is the strength you have. Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's quiet, patient, and protective, like what you experienced here. As the fire crackled softly, casting warm light over the cabin, Emma closed her eyes for the first time in days, feeling a sense of safety she had never known. Jake, Shadow, and Marta watched over her, guardians not only of her life, but of her trust and fledgling hope. Outside, the storm had passed completely, leaving a world transformed by snow and silence. Inside, a new day was beginning, a day where courage, loyalty, and quiet heroism had prevailed. And in that small cabin, Emma began to understand what it meant to be truly safe, to heal, and to live with the honor of being protected by heroes who did not seek recognition, only the right outcome. For Jake, the soldier who had seen too much darkness, this was the victory that mattered. For Shadow, it was another life saved. And for Emma, it was the first day of a life where she could finally believe that kindness, courage, and loyalty could coexist in a world that once felt cruel and unyielding. The cabin was still. The snow outside glistened. And inside, hope had found a home.